Millionaire ignores starving homeless girl. What she says next makes him freeze. Richard Hale walks like a man who keeps the city and its schedules in his bones. His coat is new enough that the rain still beads on the fabric. His shoes are scuffed in a way that only a man who has places to be allows. His watch vibrates against his wrist like a small insistence. Downtown is a river of bodies and noise and flashing lights, and Richard cuts through it with the confidence of someone who believes timetables matter more than faces. He has 5 minutes to get from curb to elevator. There are contracts to sign, a conference room waiting, a promise of growth that will be quoted in next quarter's headlines. His briefcase is leather, dark and heavy with the weight of decisions. His phone buzzes again, a message marked urgent, a calendar ping that blinks his fate. The crosswalk light hums, a bicycle bell announces an impatient courier. He steps around a puddle and doesn't slow. On the curb, half hidden by a polished car, a small girl sits on a folded cardboard square. Her clothes are layered and thin in a stubborn way. Her hair has been combed but not fixed. There's the dry, chalky look of dust along the cuffs. She holds out one small palm and a paper cup. Her hand is steady as she watches the river of strangers move past like a tide. Most people do what the tide asks. Look away. Richard watches the city. He doesn't look at the child. He thinks of the meeting, the speech he'll deliver. His mind runs through his lines. The girl's voice, soft as a paper plane, reaches him as if from another street. "Sir," she says, "could you spare some change for a sandwich?" It is the kind of request his assistants have taught him to answer with a polite smile and a quick avoidance. He angles his shoulders to clear her sightline. He tells himself 1,000 small reasons. He doesn't carry cash. It's not safe to give. Someone else will help. He has no time. He lets his steps carry him past. Her next sentence is not a plea. It is a small, dry truth spoken with the kind of honesty that children are allowed to wield. "When people don't look at our faces," she says, without the tremor of begging, "it's because we don't exist." The world around him narrows. The phone against his ribs hums, and then, in a way that feels like someone turning off the city, all sound thins, except for that voice. Richard pauses a step. The breath he'd been keeping for later, presentation, handshake, elevator, drops out of him. He freezes. For a second, it is only physical. His shoe planted on the painted crosswalk line, the crowd sliding by on either side. For another second, it is something deeper. The city's noise muffles, and the line she spoke presses like a hand against a glass he didn't realize was between him and the street. He turns back. The girl hasn't moved. Her eyes, dark and clear, look straight at him with an expectant patience he has seen in other places. At a boardroom table, a podium, but never aimed at him like a mirror. "Sir?" she asks, and there is no shame in it. There is a little command. "Will you look at me?" He stands there, a man of decisive gestures, and finds himself incapable of the simplest thing, meeting a child's gaze without measuring consequence. He doesn't know what else to do, so he takes the slow, clumsy step that breaks the distance. "Hey," he says, because every adult's first instinct is to soften. "Hey there, what's your name?" "Clara," she answers. The name fits the face like an honest coin. Clara Santos. He hears the last name and a memory like the trailing of a dream. Brief, indistinct. A gala years ago. A woman with tired hands serving coffee at a volunteer table. A registration sheet with a name he'd glanced over. He has no proof, only the way his mouth remembers the shape of the syllables. The memory is a corridor with doors he never opened. Clara crumples something small in her other hand and holds it out in a gesture both protective and plain. It looks like a scrap of paper, folded unevenly, edges softened by many unfoldings. When she offers it, she doesn't make the motion of begging. She offers it like a thing she needs seen. "Can you stay until I finish?" she asks. "Please, I promised my mom I'd wait. If I don't come back..." She swallows the rest. Her voice is steady. Whatever fear she holds is tucked like a coin into a pocket. "Finish what?" He is aware of his phone lighting up again, vibrations like the tick of an unspent second. But when she says the word "mom," the phone feels like a trivial instrument. She unfolds the paper with patient fingers. The page is marked with a child's scrawl and the tremor of someone trying to keep a secret neat. Richard leans in despite himself. He does not have to. His presence is bigger than hers. He realizes that the weight of his coat forms a small shelter over the scrap. The city smells of exhaust and coffee and the faint sweetness that rises from the bakery a block away. The note reads, "If I don't come back, find the man in the suit with the brown briefcase. Richard Hale." Hale. The name on the paper is a hand's attempt at spelling memory. He hears his name not as a title, but as something intimate and small, written in ink that has been folded and smudged. It is the sort of thing that shouldn't exist on a scrap in a stranger's palm. The letters press against his retinas. "You know me?" he asks before he can stop himself. He hears his voice, and it sounds different, softer, like a man surprised out of habit. Clara nods. "Mama said, if she had to stay at the job late, if she couldn't come home, she told me to find Mr. Hale. She said someone there helped her years ago. She said you'd know what to do." Her chin lifts as if testing the weight of the expectation she just cast into the world. Richard's knees feel thin. The city rushes around them like a river reclaiming its banks. The apartment towers and glass and neon signs assert their indifferent geometry. He finds himself thinking of the night, years ago, when his company held a fundraiser and the auction was loud and the charity table was quiet. He remembers a woman at that table, someone who had shown up at dawn to fold chairs, someone who had given him a cup of coffee and a hospital smile, someone who had signed her name on a sheet in small, hurried letters. Letitia. The name rises like steam. He looks at the scrap again. The handwriting doesn't match the letter of the memory. It is a different hand. Clara's, perhaps. But the last name is there. The one he only half remembered now confirmed in a single, impossible phrase. The realization is not theatrical. It is a raw little shock, the kind that shocks because it is the collision of ordinary things. A name, a paper, a face. For a man whose life runs on schedules, it is enough to unmoor him. The vibrating phone still pulses in his coat. He can feel the pressure of the meeting stacking on his ribs. He can feel the public's expectation of him. He is, by any reasonable metric, late. He pockets the phone. The motion is small and tells more about him than any speech board. He tells himself he will call later. He does not know why he makes that choice, except that a child's faith in a name is a hand extended toward him that he cannot ignore. "Stay," he says, and the simplicity of the word surprises him. He has just made a promise, a modest, unadorned pledge. "I'll stay until you finish." Clara allows herself a tiny smile. "Thank you," she says. And for a moment the busy street condenses into the two of them. Her fingers close around the scrap like a talisman, and when she speaks she resumes the cadence of someone reading from a map. "My mom works at the cafe on Pine and 3rd, Clara begins. "She said she had to take this job to pay the room. If she doesn't get out before midnight, she told me to find a man she remembered." "A cafe?" Richard repeats, committing the address to his mind. Pine and 3rd could be 3 blocks away or 3 miles. In his head the map reconfigures with his old knowledge of the grid. The bakery's bell rings nearby, a bright little note that smells like butter and warmth. "She told me to look for someone in a suit with a brown briefcase." Clara lifts her head. Her face is smaller in the city, but the way she pronounces the words is precise, earnest. She wrote his name down on a piece of paper because she said sometimes when people are tired they forget faces. She said, "If I ever get lost, find him." Richard's hand tightens unconsciously on his briefcase. He remembers a folded program, a photograph, a name on a sign-up sheet. The memory is not exact. Memory never is. But there is enough to make the present urgent. A name, a promise, a child entrusted to the city. Across the street, a bakery window glows like a hearth. The scent pulls at him, and not simply because he is hungry. Food, he realizes, is a language of care that needs no spreadsheet. He fishes out his wallet in a gesture that feels almost ceremonial, buys a sandwich and a hot paper cup of soup with the practiced ease of someone who spends money like water, and brings them back to Clara. She accepts the food with the kind of gratefulness that does not need to declare gratitude aloud. She eats like a person who knows how to savor small mercies quickly, but who also knows not to look greedy. Richard watches and learns to watch in an unhurried way, noting the steadiness of her hands, the way the corner of her lip lifts when flavor warms her, the way her eyes dart to the street corners as if measuring each stranger for kindness. "Do you want me to call someone?" he asks when the sandwich is almost gone. He realizes how strange that sounds coming from him. Usually the person who calls is the benefactor with a foundation. Today he is the man on the curb holding a scarf with an envelope's weight in his palm. Clara shakes her head. "No." She folds the paper into a smaller square and tugs at it as if it holds a secret only she can read. "I already promised to wait. She told me to wait. And she told me not to tell the big men, please. That makes people look away. She said to ask them like you're holding a paper. There is, in the way she explains, an instruction not aimed at him but at the world. How to be seen without being invisible. It lodges in his chest. He thinks of all the times he has asked for favors politely, the way he has phrased requests in boardrooms so that they are treated with importance. There is an ugly symmetry. Privilege and invisibility playing a game where one's voice is always louder. "Who is your mother?" he asks, tasting the real question. Has she been in his orbit before? Is this the frayed web of past kindnesses now reaching out with a plea? "Tell me her name." "Letitia Santos," Clara answers. She looks at him like the spoken name is a bridge. "She's the one who told me to find Mr. Hale." The syllables return like a found object. Letitia. He remembers a woman with worn hands at a volunteer registration table, a woman who joked she'd seen him in a different life. He had been younger then, less aware of the consequences of ignoring a face. He had smiled and moved on. The memory is a small file he has kept closed because it was inconvenient to open. "You said Mr. Hale," he says. His voice is small in the space of his own conscience. Clara nods. "Mama said you'd know. She put the name on the paper so I could find you. She told me if she couldn't come back, you would help." There it is, an expectation placed by a mother on a man who remembers her. The idea is simple and impossible all at once. The city continues to move as if this were not a pivot point in a life. Taxis honk, a bus sighs, a pigeon flutters toward the neon. Richard hears the faint click of his watch again and feels a tug toward duty. He thinks of the meeting room and 100 small obligations threading through the day. He could go. He could be late, call his assistant, explain that an unexpected errand held him. He could leave this child and her folded paper and the name Letitia on the curb where the city would take care of it or swallow it. Nobody would blame him. But when he looks at Clara, there is an unarguable thing. A child has trusted his name. He keeps his promise. "Okay," he says, and there is no flourish. "I'll help you find her." Her face shifts. She gives him a look that is not triumph but relief, as if a simple human ledger has been balanced. She tucks the scrap back into her pocket like a small secret victory. "You have to listen," she tells him. "My mom always says, don't give people your pity, give them your time." The phrase surprises him into silence. He realizes he has been trained to compartmentalize pity and time into different currencies. Here, a child tells him they are exchangeable. They start by walking. The city opens into blocks and alleys, and Richard lets Clara lead. She can move with the reckless certainty of the small who know a map by the smell of its bakeries. They pass a florist whose window is a blare of color, and then the church whose stoop shelters 3 people in the shade. People glance. Some look away. Some look at Richard as if to measure the distance between them and wealth. He is suddenly conscious of what his coat and briefcase say before he opens his mouth. He senses how he must relearn how to move in public without erasing the other people in it. When they reach Pine and 3rd, the cafe is a narrow place with steam on the windows and a hand-painted sign that has frayed edges. The bell rings when they push the door. Inside, a woman in a stained apron dries plates and counts tips. A man with a newspaper mutters about the stock index. The place smells like milk and old comfort. Clara pauses at the door like she is entering a room 20 years too late, and Richard watches her breathe in the warmth. The woman at the counter looks up. She's younger than Richard expected, and older than Clara's words suggested, with a face that softens instantly when she sees the child. "Clara?" she calls, and the voice is both relief and rehearsal, as if she has said the name many times and is still astonished each time. "I'm right here," Clara answers, small and proud. She moves toward the back as if the cafe itself could lead her to a mother. Richard steps inside and places his hand on the counter in a manner that is all business. "Excuse me," he says to the woman. "I'm looking for someone, Letitia Santos. Have you seen?" The woman's expression changes. She searches her memory, then looks at the cash register and reaches under it as if a file might be hiding there. "Letitia? Yeah, she comes in sometimes. Works the late shift. She was here earlier today, said something about being paid late. Why? Oh." Her eyes narrow as she looks from Richard to Clara, then to the scrap of paper peeking from the child's pocket. "You got a nice man following you?" she asks, a hint of curiosity seasoned with protective skepticism. Richard gives a small, awkward smile. "You could say that." She points to a back shelf and then to the door. "Check the storage room, kid. Someone left an envelope in the blue jar." She says it like it's a small ritual. Sometimes customers leave notes. Sometimes they leave food. Clara nods. already moving like a child who knows the choreography of small-town favors. She slips past tables into a tiny storeroom that smells of sugar and cardboard. Richard watches and wonders how often these tiny favors aggregate into a life. The bell above the door jingles, and a baker named Mr. George, the bread man from 2 doors down, waves at Clara as if she were family. The world is made of small acquaintances and the quiet ledger of unpaid kindnesses. Clara returns with an envelope. Her fingers are quick and careful as she slides a quarter from inside it and hands it to the woman at the counter for a coffee. She opens the envelope with a small clinking sound, as if unwrapping a private thing, and what's inside is a photograph taped to a folded paper. The photograph is not dramatic. It is an ordinary snapshot of a woman with softer edges and a tired smile. The paper folds into a map with a single address, and in spidery handwriting a phone number. It reads, Room 6, 14th Street Boarding House. If I don't come back, go there. Tell them Letitia sent you. Richard reads it 3 times because reading is the only way to believe the world may bend to accommodate such a coincidence. He thinks of all the possible explanations and discards most of them in order of probability. A woman had trusted a man years ago. That man had a name. A mother had remembered and taught that name to her child as a compass. It is small, and it is enormous. He puts the photograph gently in his jacket pocket, as if touching an obligation will not make it real, but will make it contained. He looks at Clara, whose eyes are wide but not unsteady. She is not fluttering with hope. She is anchored by it. Okay, he says, and the word no longer feels like a mere postponement of a corporate obligation. Let's go to the boarding house. His phone is still sleeping in his coat. He chooses, for reasons he cannot fully justify, to leave it there. They walk again, this time with a simple plan. Find a place called the 14th Street Boarding House, Room 6. The city becomes a series of numbers and names and small nods. On the way, Richard notices things he had not noticed before, not in a performative way, but with a dawning attentiveness. The light falls differently on people's faces when they are seen, he realizes. Faces that had been anonymous in his peripheral vision now become stories. He finds himself cataloging details instead of deadlines. A woman holding a toddler who smells of powdered milk, a teenager with a backpack that has a patched seam, a dog asleep beneath a stoop. Clara chatters sometimes, about small facts that betray a larger adaptability. How to cross busy streets without frightening the drivers, which ice cream shop gives extra cones to kids in winter, where the old lady sells keys for $1. It is the kind of knowledge that comes from being required to navigate the margins. Richard listens, and each small story is a map he never carried. When they reach 14th Street, the boarding house is a narrow brownstone with a tin mailbox and a sagging stoop. The name on the door is hand-painted and slightly askew. Zulaide's Boarding House. A bell that looks like it belongs to a simpler age hangs by the door. Someone inside, the owner, Clara tells him, keeps the key and the ledger and a small secret theory about how to keep people from falling all the way through the cracks. Richard hears his own pulse in his ears. He feels for the second time that day the strange surrender of a man who has walked into a room and discovered unseen people. He realizes how much of his life has been a procession of rooms he has not entered. He rings the bell. The door opens to the sound of an old radio and the smell of boiled laundry. A woman with a stout frame and a tidy bun stands in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. Her name, Clara had told him, was Zulaide. Her face folds into a map of years. But when she sees the child in front of her, something brightens. "Can I help you?" she asks, and it is both welcome and question. "One of your boarders?" Clara says quickly, as if rehearsing the script. "Room 6, Letitia Santos. Have you seen her?" Zulaide's eyes narrow as she consults the ledger, her fingers moving with the practiced motion of a woman who keeps many small lives in order. She thumbs through pages, and Richard sees the names of people like stitches. Letitia. She stops and points to a page. "Yes, she's there," Zulaide says slowly. "Her rent's paid through tonight. She left this note for her daughter." Her voice softens. She hands Clara a folded paper that smells faintly of lavender and ink. Clara takes the note with the solemnity of someone being entrusted with the last line of a play. She unfolds it. Her lips move as she reads something only she and her mother know. Then, before she can finish, the room exhales with a distant sound, as if the world is remembering to breathe. From the hallway, a key turns in a lock upstairs. Steps come down, uneven and fast. "Letitia!" Clara calls, and the name ricochets off the stairwell. For a breath, nothing happens. Richard's skin prickles. He pictures 1,000 unlikely endings. The mother at work, folded into a shift that will not end. The mother arrested at a crossroads. The mother lost in a hospital waiting room. Each image is a loom, thin and flickering. Then, a woman appears at the top of the stairs. She comes down with the unsteadiness of someone who has been running on the wrong kind of light. And when she reaches the bottom, her shoulders fold and she looks like a person who has been made thin by long winters. Her eyes search the room and then land on Clara. Time reshapes. The thing in the air is not melodrama. It is the ordinary reunion of a child and her mother in a city that often keeps them apart. Letitia moves as if propelled by all the steps she has taken to get there. The late shifts, the bus rides, the small compromises. She kneels before Clara with a grace that is all fierce and tender at once. Mi vida, she says when she reaches her daughter, and her voice is a map in another language folded into English, an older grammar of love. She takes Clara into her arms, and Clara melts into the shape of being carried. The two of them press together like pieces rejoined after a long drift. Richard steps back. He watches from the doorway like a man who has witnessed a small miracle he did not plan. He remembers the scrap of paper, the name, his own stalled step. He thinks of the meeting he has missed and feels no regret sharp enough to outweigh what he has gained. A quiet, unshowy lesson about what it costs to be seen. Letitia looks up between the fold of the reunion and their eyes meet. Recognition sparks, not because she had expected him to be there, but because his name, inked on a scrap by a woman across years, had reached toward her in a way that is hard to explain. Her mouth forms the syllable Hale as if testing the shape. You, she begins, and for an instant the world holds its breath. Richard pushes his coat back from his chest like a man adjusting his role in a scene not of his making. He reaches into his pocket and removes the photograph he had been carrying like a talisman. He offers it the way one would offer a returned thing, gently, without claiming credit for the thread that tied them together. Letitia takes the photograph and holds it close to her heart. Her hands shake a little. She is not theatrical. She is human, raw, and steady. "Thank you," she whispers. It is not a sentence that carries the weight of all apologies, but it carries enough to lift the shape of the moment into something like reconciliation. In the hallway, Zuleide watches like an old woman who has seen life rearrange itself 1,000 times. Mr. George has come in with a bag of bread in his arms. His face is a quiet celebration. The cafe woman leans on the kitchen counter, a cup of coffee abandoned in her hand. The small community of people whose livelihoods keep others afloat has gathered like an invisible net. Richard realizes, with a clarity that is almost startling, that the meeting he thought would define his day was never the thing that would define him. The choice to stay, to look, to listen, to follow a scrap of paper, this, he understands, is the moment that will ripple. He has missed the meeting. He turns his phone back on with a small mechanical motion to see the cascade of messages and the clock's angry yellow digits. The meeting will be angry. The world he runs belongs to contracts and to quarterly metrics. But in his chest, some long small switch has flipped. He feels lighter, or perhaps merely unburdened by the pretense of not seeing. Letitia straightens, clutching the photo. She turns to him with a directness that makes him feel both exposed and acknowledged. "You helped us," she says simply. There is no demand in the sentence, only a recognition. "I only followed a name," Richard answers, and the truth of the words is simple and humbling. He thinks of the other names in Zuleida's ledger, of the small economies of care that the city keeps in its margins. He thinks of the woman at the charity table years ago who had smiled and given him no coin, but a point of contact, someone he'd never realized would one day return to him in a different currency. Clara squeezes Letitia's hand, and for a moment the three of them are a small constellation. The room holds them like a stage that has returned to its proper use. People, reunited by the geometry of attention. Zuleida breaks the silence with a practical question. "What now? Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" Her question is not accusatory but logistical, the way a person who runs a boarding house must be. Letitia's eyes flicker. There is a line in them that says yes and no, and maybe. Richard feels the weight of a decision he never set out to make. He has, almost without planning it, stepped into an obligation. The idea that his day will be rearranged, that his calendar will suffer, is a small expense in the ledger of what it might mean to be fully human. "Can I leave a card?" he asks. "If you need anything, job leads, a place for Clara to stay, call me." It is a modest gesture. It is one promise. His voice is even. He offers the card without ceremony. Letitia takes it and tucks it into her apron as if storing a small, fragile moth of hope. "Thank you," she says again. And this time, the words carry the weight of someone who knows how much small practical things can matter. A number, a referral, a name held in someone else's memory. Richard steps back into the light of the doorway after a while, the meeting in his mind already receding into the category of missed obligations. He thinks of the day he will return to the boardroom, how he will explain his tardiness with a clipped email and perhaps a terse apology. He thinks of the kind of man he will be at the podium, perhaps unchanged, perhaps nudged. He does not know yet. As they prepare to leave the boarding house, Clara pulls him aside. Her face is resolute in a way that is fierce for her smallness. "Promise me you'll stay until she's okay?" she asks. It is not a plea. It is a vow offered as a measurement. "I promise," he replies. And the word is now an instrument he has put in motion. It is the only explicit interpersonal promise he allows himself in this small story, and he says it because he feels the truth of it anchoring him. She nods, satisfied. She takes his hand for a moment, the contact brief and charged, as if sealing the bargain. They step back into the street. Outside, evening is thinning into a blue that belongs to the city's quieter hours. The lights of shop fronts begin to flicker on like low-burning lamps. Richard's phone lights up behind him, the screen demanding attention with the listless urgency of modern life. He leaves it in his coat and folds himself into the slow rhythm of people who have chosen to slow down, baking a small laundry list of calls, a few referrals, an extra hour spent making sure Letitia's paperwork is in order. He imagines the meeting rescheduling itself around an absence. He imagines the boardroom moving on. And yet the city has another story to tell him. As they walk up the block, a man who runs a small pawn shop looks at them and nods in recognition to Clara. A young volunteer from a community center passes them and catches their eye, offering a fleeting business card from a lanyard. The web of help is small and interlaced. It is not a salvation in the grand sense, but a lattice of people doing small things. Richard watches the exchange of small favors and thinks of the night years ago, when Letitia's name first passed through his life like a rumor. He has always been good at organizing numbers, at making plans. Walking beside Clara now, he begins to understand another kind of accounting, that which tallies attention, time, and presence. They approach an intersection, and for a moment the street is a still photograph of a man who has chosen to miss a meeting and a woman who has found her child. The city hums and presses around them. He feels something loosen, not a grand redemption, not a solved life, but a small, honest recalibration. "What happens now?" Clara asks quietly, as if the next step is both practical and a test. She wants to know if promises will be kept. Richard looks at her. The evening fall makes her very small. He hears the rhythm of his life, meetings, flights, obligations, beating insistently in the pocket. He hears the possible futures synchronized with the small act of keeping a promise. He thinks of all the people he's passed on the street and the apologies he has never made. He thinks of the simple act of being looked at. "Now," he says, and his voice carries an ease he hasn't felt all day. "We keep looking." They cross the street together, a millionaire and a little girl, a small community of strangers watching. The city envelops them in its ordinary motions, and Richard Hale takes a step he has never really taken before. He walks without letting the clock in his pocket dictate the worth of the people around him. A taxi splashes by, sending a mist over his shoes. The bakery bell rings in the distance. He is late. The city has not collapsed. He is, undeniably, changed in the way that small decisions can change the contour of a life. He does not know yet what that change will demand, only that the seed has been planted. They move toward the next clue, a small envelope left in the bakery jar, and Richard senses that the evening will stretch, that favors will be asked and given, that a boardroom will become a footnote to a night that matters more. He does not feel like a hero. He feels like a man who has been taught to look. The streetlights blink once, as if signaling to the city that something quiet and important has begun. They step back into the street with the boarding house behind them and the city folding its evening pockets around them. For a moment, the three of them, Richard, Letitia, Clara, are an unlikely convoy, a man who moves through the world by schedules, a woman whose days have been rearranged around survival, and a child who carries a name like a compass. The light is thinner now. Shop windows bloom like small beacons. Before they leave the stoop, Mr. George the baker presses a paper bag into Letitia's hands. "Take these," he says gruffly. "Hot rolls last a little while." He doesn't look for thanks. The gesture is part of the muscle of his life. Zuleida fumbles through a drawer and produces a small envelope with a few dollars in it, folded like a private concession. The cafe woman, who Claudia had called from the counter, steps up and offers a number on a scrap of receipt paper. "This is Ms. Lords at the community center," she says. "She'll know where to start." The kitchen light throws their faces into warm relief. Richard watches these small, practiced acts and starts to learn the shape of help he'd ignored for so long. The network is not a single handout, but a braided set of tiny hands. It requires presence more than patronage. The realization is not theatrical. It arrives as a domestic fact the way a cup cools when you set it down. Clara tugs at his sleeve. "You coming?" she asks. Her voice is steady. The hold she has on the evening feels like the map she's been taught to read. Ms. Lords helps people fill forms. She knows how to make things move. They follow the directions. 2 blocks farther, a narrow center tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The community center smells faintly of coffee and old paperwork. A bulletin board pins up flyers about parenting classes, job fairs, and a holiday meal drive. The woman behind the desk looks up as they enter. Lords, hair pulled back into a practical knot, the kind of person who has learned to answer urgency with the economy of routines. "You found her," Lords says before introductions. Her eyes go to Clara with the careful directness of someone who has been trained to see individuals, not statistics. "Is she okay?" "She's fine," Richard says, because it's easier than explaining the way his chest has been hollowed out and refilled. Letitia stands beside him, holding the bag of rolls to her chest like protection and proof. Lords gestures them to a table. "Sit, tell me what happened." Letitia speaks in a quick, practiced cadence, the language of someone who compresses long days into short explanations. She says she took the late shift to pay rent, that the boarding house was a temporary fix, that sometimes the buses ran late, and sometimes the phone calls were delayed, and sometimes the world determined a life by which side of schedules you fell on. Clara sits close to her, knees tucked, the scrap of paper folded into a small rectangle between her fingers. Lords listens without interrupting. She nods and takes their names, then begins the work of turning small kindnesses into practical help. An emergency room in paperwork form. She writes down a list. Food vouchers, a short-term rent grant the center can request from a partner fund, a referral to a job placement program tomorrow, and most urgently, proof of identity assistance so Letitia can start receiving a paycheck promptly. She asks about a social security card, about prior employment, about the boarding house ledger. As she works, Richard sits at the end of the table, quiet in a way that is foreign to him. His business instincts bristle at forms that have no margin column, no clear return on investment. Yet each checked box and signature is a step, small, concrete, away from the abstract charity he had imagined helping must be. When Lords asks simply, "Do you have someone who can help with childcare if you get a shift?" he finds himself offering, without thinking, a practical solution rather than a donation. "I can help," he says. The words land and feel foreign and right. Lords looks up sharply, appraisal in her gaze. "You'll need to follow through," she says. "We don't do promises that evaporate." Richard's throat tightens. He hears Clara's earlier insistence. "Promise me you'll stay until she's okay," and understands that what matters is not the card he hands over, but whether his name becomes a ledger of steady actions. Before anyone can argue the point, Mr. George walks in, flour dust on his sleeves, eyes bright. "Letitia," he says simply, "you ever work a bakery?" The question is blunt and practical. Letitia shakes her head, indulgent in the shame and hope that settle around such offers. "We can use a hand setting up for the morning rush," he tells Lords. "I can pay cash for a trial day. If she does well, I can keep her on." His mouth tightens into a hard honesty. He is not promising steady months, but he is promising tomorrow. It's the kind of offer that isn't a rescue, it's a foothold. Lords makes a notation, her pen cleanly translating the exchange into a plan. "We'll help with ID in the morning," she says. "Get her in tomorrow for the paperwork, bring the boarding house ledger, and we'll file for the emergency grant today." Richard finds himself sitting taller, as if the notion of arranging support is something he knows how to do. He calls his assistant to explain he will be late, leaving a voicemail clipped and formal, then hesitates and dials instead. His assistant answers and, after a short explanation, says, "Take whatever you need to get it done." The word "need" in her tone is a small kindness from a system he's built. He thanks her, hangs up, and then looks at Letitia. "Do you have ID?" he asks, because he wants to know the steps he can take now. Letitia produces a folded paper with a name and an address and little else. The social center has been there to bridge many such gaps. Richard signs his name at Lord's request as a witness for an identification verification form, a bureaucratic motion with deep consequences. When he signs, the motion feels both strange and ordinary. He is no longer only the man who organizes other people's time. He is organizing the moment in front of him. He is learning to trade headline measures for human measures. Clara sits quietly as people move around her. Later, when she thinks about the evening, she will remember the way the fluorescent light softened when the center's volunteers brought steaming cartons of soup. For now, she watches a woman hand her a sticker for patience and food, and she tucks it into her pocket like a new medal. The night stretches into tasks. Lords makes calls. Richard produces a copy of his card and offers to be a temporary reference for a job lead the center has, and Mr. George calls to reserve a morning shift. Zulaide negotiates with the boarding house ledger, switching Letitia's rent schedule a week so the emergency grant covers the arrears, and the cafe woman offers to pick up a coffee on account so Letitia can be at work the next morning without worrying about change. Small actions knit into a tangible plan. When a volunteer brings a folder with application forms and a pen with someone else's name on it, Richard feels the odd heat of being needed in a way he hadn't measured before. He helps fill out the boxes where Letitia hesitates. He takes on the part of the role he understands best, coordinating and keeping promises. It is not heroic, it is human. At one point, Clara leans over and whispers, "You kept your promise." Her voice is quick, the kind of proof children can deliver in a single breath. Richard looks at her and nods. The promise had been small. Stay until she's okay. It had forced him to stop an appointment and step into a street he seldom walked. That step keeps becoming more than a single motion. Somewhere in the center's soft hum, the idea of a missed meeting cracks into a new shape. Later, when he replays the day in his head, he will admit to himself that the meeting's importance was always measured by a metric that didn't require a human face. The afternoon that had seemed scheduled to craft a corporate future now looks like a misread of what matters. He had been frozen, literally at the curb, by a child's line, and that freeze had opened him to a longer attention. The next morning is a chorus of small reparations. Letitia goes to Mr. George's bakery at dawn. She arrives with a borrowed apron, hands that have been smoothed by washing but not softened by ease. The bakery is a single room of steam and metal, and Mr. George teaches her the rhythm of early shifts, how to fold dough without tearing its shape, how to time the oven so the crescent buns brown but don't burn. She moves with the kind of concentration that labor breeds. Steady, present, focused on the work in hand. She is tired but not defeated. Richard arrives before 8, carrying a thermos and an extra set of hands. He doesn't stay long. He knows the work is Letitia's to learn, but he sits on a crate at the back of the bakery and watches as a woman who once handed him a cup of coffee at a fundraiser now turns a tray with calloused care. He makes coffee runs for the staff and hands a sandwich to Clara when she shows up at the crack between school and wandering. The gestures are small and literal, and that is the point. By midweek, the center has arranged a temporary voucher for room payment. Zulaide, who runs the boarding house with an unceremonious authority, accepts the arrangement and thumbs through the ledger to mark the date. The ledger is a book of people who have nearly slipped. Its pages are the city's secret margin. Letitia receives a phone call from a temp agency that found her resume in Lord's files. They offer an interview for a stable daytime position, handling inventory at a small wholesale company. It is not an instant cure, but it is a path. In the evenings, Richard starts to show up with predictable regularity. He cancels flights that once planeted his calendar and reschedules commitments with an efficiency he used to reserve for mergers. To his board, he explains a family emergency with tidy sentences. They accept, and the world carries on without asking too many questions. The small adjustments people in power must make feel different now. They carry a human cost that, until this week, had been abstract. There are awkward moments. Richard fumbles at times. He makes a suggestion that comes from a place of privilege, and Lords gently corrects him. When he suggests a large donation to the center, she deflects. "We need relationships more than checks," she says. The phrase hems his impulse and offers a yardstick for future action. He begins to learn how to give in ways that are consistent with dignity. Phone numbers, job leads, time, and an insistence on follow-through. Clara thrives in the new rhythm. She starts attending a kids program at the community center, which offers tutoring and a hot meal after school. She colors with crayons and studies multiplication with a seriousness that surprises her tutors. Math is, for her, a map of predictability in an uncertain life. Sometimes she walks home with a volunteer named Sarah, who carries a backpack stuffed with school supplies and a smile that refuses to be casual. Clara's eyes shine in a way Richard hadn't noticed in the rush of the first day. The relief of constancy. The transformation around them is not instantaneous. There are bills to be negotiated, cries in the night when a bus doesn't come, and the slow grinding machinery of paper that must produce identity in order for paychecks to arrive. But there are also small, visible victories. Letitia's first paycheck from Mr. George's bakery, modest enough to be a step, arrives in an orderly envelope. She pays a week's rent and keeps the remainder for groceries. A temp agency calls and asks if she can start part-time next week in inventory, contingent on references and ID. Zulita phones to say a friend of hers has a crib for a child of a neighbor. Clara sleeps in a bed with a mattress that doesn't dip. Throughout, Richard is learning to be a name people can call. He follows through on calls to his assistant and to a lawyer friend who can help with expedited identification documents. He sits with Letitia while she writes a resume at the community center, turning the phrases into plain, honest claims of work and endurance. He buys textbooks for Clara and signs them with a small note. Keep learning. He has not become a hero. He has become someone who keeps a ledger of names he promised to honor. One afternoon, a month after he first paused at the curb, Richard is invited to sit with a small circle at Lord's office. It is an informal check-in. How are the accommodations working? Is the child's schooling stabilized? Is there anything else needed? The conversation is practical and blunt, and when Lords asks Richard if he's willing to become a formal mentor for the referral program, helping other parents navigate work placement, he says yes, with the simplicity of a man who no longer measures his time only in profit. The gesture is not about power, but exchange. What he can offer that matters is his calendar and his capacity to open doors he once took for granted. He learns to introduce people by name instead of title. He shows up to an agency meeting and sits with a mother whose hands tremble. He speaks in plain terms and offers to make a call that he knows will carry weight. At night, when the office is dark and the city's neon signs make a slow economy of colors, he thinks of the moment on the sidewalk, of the sentence that stopped him. When people don't look at our faces, it's because we don't exist. The phrase has become a small lodestone in his life. He hears it not as accusation, but as instruction. Seeing is active. It demands practice. Months pass in manageable increments. Letitia's temporary shifts stabilize into something more consistent. The temp agency hires her for inventory work 2 days a week, and the bakery keeps her mornings as a side job. The extra hours let her pay her ledger and begin to save for a child's school uniform. Zuleide agrees to a modest discount when the ledger is tight, and she keeps an eye on the months like a steward. Clara's teacher writes a short note praising her focus and curiosity, and Richard puts the note in a frame on a small shelf in his home office, a private memento of a new measure of value. Richard's company calls him back into a boardroom presentation at the end of the quarter. He gives his speech with a steady voice and fewer certainties about the weight of profits. He introduces a small corporate match to the community center's job placement fund and suggests a partnership with local businesses for employment pipelines. The suggestions are practical, not bluster. He is learning to measure success by a wider yardstick. His colleagues nod, and the annual reports will include bullet points about social investment. It is a start, not a solution. He knows that. There is one evening when he walks past the same curb where he first met Clara. A new child sits there with a paper cup. The man's first instinct is the taut avoidance, but the taut man, he, has changed. He pauses, looks, and then continues. This time, looking is the work. The story's turning point, Clara's sentence that made him freeze, has become a hinge that altered a timetable. He has learned the discipline of being available, and the city has rearranged itself not by miracle, but by steady practice. The relationships formed in those first weeks remain. Mr. George dropping off an occasional loaf, Zuleide keeping a room open in an emergency, Lourdes reminding him to call when he forgets. The most telling moment comes when Clara, older by a summer's worth of lessons, brings a small drawing to the center. It depicts a man in a suit beside a girl with untamed hair, holding a bright sun between them. Above the sun she has written, in childlike letters, "Thank you for looking." Richard keeps the drawing on his desk. When people ask why he keeps a child's scrawl framed near a financial forecast, he only smiles and says, "It reminds me what matters." On the anniversary of their meeting, The community holds a small gathering in the center's modest meeting room. There is coffee, a plate of cookies from the bakery, and a crowd of neighbors who have become, in small ways, a safety net. Letitia stands and thanks the volunteers and Mr. George and Lords, taking a breath and looking directly at Richard, who has come because he promised he would. He watches as Letitia's voice wobbles, then steadies. She speaks of nights she could not find a bus, of a child who kept a name like a compass, and of the man who stopped. "You didn't have to," she says, and the room absorbs the plainness of the sentence. "No," Richard answers. He doesn't say he was punished for not stopping. He says instead, "I'm glad I did." The truth is enough. It is not a grand absolution. It is a ledger entry in a life being rewritten. After the gathering, as people drift back into the street and the evening hum resumes, Richard, walks home with a lightness he had not known months before. His phone predictably buzzes with messages and meeting requests, but the sounds no longer dominate him the way they once did. He answers a few, declines others with brief apologies, and then powers the phone off to sit with a quiet that is not absence, but choice. Before he turns the key in his apartment, he pauses and looks at the framed drawing on his office desk in his mind. He thinks of the child on the curb who had asked to be seen, and he thinks of the series of small people, baker, boarding house owner, social worker, whose hands had threaded the solution. The moment that once froze him has become a warm memory, a pivot that reshaped his days. He knows he will never be the same man who believed timetables mattered more than faces. Walking through the building vestibule, he thinks of obligations in a new currency: time, presence, and the steady fulfillment of promises. He has missed meetings. He has made calls. He has signed forms. He has kept a child's trust. The calculus is messy and human, and, in the end, true. He reaches the street where the city's lights wash everything in diluted gold. He pauses, not from a sentence that stops him this time, but from a habitual momentum he has chosen to interrupt. Across the way, a young woman sits wrapped in a blanket and lifts a cup toward the passing tide of people. He looks, catches the woman's eyes, and nods. She nods back. It is a small exchange, no speeches, no fanfare. But it is the continuation of a practice that began when he could not look away. There will be other moments. There will be files to sign, checks to write, and schedules to juggle. There will be times when he fails, when his calendar swallows his intention, and a child will again teach him the cost of inattention. But for now, he carries in his pocket a promise kept, and in his head a sentence that had the power to stop a man and start him again. When people don't look at our faces, it's because we don't exist. He had once believed that influence was measured by speeches given and deals closed. He now understands that influence is also measured by the small ledger of human contact, by the way a name is remembered, a shift is offered, a rent ledger adjusted, a child taught multiplication. He had been frozen by a small, honest sentence and then warmed by work that followed. If this story has made you look twice, consider sharing it. Maybe someone you know needs the reminder that seeing is an action, not an accident.